I'm Laurie Ferry. I'm the Director of Professional Learning at CIESC. I'm also the Director of Keep Indiana Learning. And I appreciate you joining our session today on quantiles. And I appreciate being asked by Brian to join the Learning Summit this year. I think I've been part of the Learning Summit for at least the last 3 years, might have been the last 4 years. And unfortunately, I can't be here live. So you're watching a video that I've recorded. And I appreciate you being a part of that. And I think Brian's going to be kind of facilitating the conversation today. So I appreciate him doing that. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking about the meaning behind quantiles. And this is going to be exciting. I'm just kidding. It actually is going to be pretty exciting. I got a chance to really dig into quantiles not too long ago, a year or so ago, when started using quantiles. And I was amazed at how fantastic quantiles can be in helping a teacher to really customize and differentiate instruction for students. So let's go ahead and get started. My Twitter is listed there. So if you'd like to do some tweeting about the session as you are moving through today, I would absolutely love that. And if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, we always have a contest in the office to see who has the most Twitter followers. So if you'd like to give me a leg up, I always appreciate that as well. You can see that there's a bit.ly on the screen. If you'd like to type in the bit.ly, that's the link to the presentation. And there are going to be several links and connections and activities built into the presentation. So if you could go ahead and type that in so that you can get connected to the presentation. You will have view-only access to the presentation. So you'll want to either keep this bit.ly, or you can add the presentation to your own Google Drive by making a copy of it and then naming it and storing it wherever you would like to in your Google Drive. Keep in mind that the bit.ly is case sensitive, so you will need to use a capital Q as you type that in. All right, so the meaning behind quantiles. All right, let's get started. I always start every session with learning intentions and success criteria. Love John Hattie, and so to follow along with John Hattie's guidelines, we always want to have a focus on what we're going to be learning within any lesson or any professional learning session. So today we're going to be examining quantiles and how they can be used to inform instruction. And so our first success criteria is that we're going to learn about how to define the meaning of quantiles and look at how it relates to individual students' math abilities, but also how it relates to task difficulty. It does both. And so we're going to see how it relates to both and then how both can be used to build a math lesson, which goes into our second and third success criteria. We're going to use quantiles to build differentiated activities and lessons in the math classroom. And then we're also going to use them to develop appropriate, equitable math lessons for all of our students. So that's some lofty goals to accomplish in a 90-minute block, but we are going to be able to do it. So let's go ahead and get started. This is the Quantile Framework for mathematics. Now, it looks a little weird, very colorful, and we're going to go through looking at this scale, but there's also an amazing website that helps us to understand what quantiles are, and it helps us to understand this scale. But as we dig in, I just want you to think about quantiles are a number value with a Q, a capital Q after it. That's how you know you're looking at a quantile measure. And you can see that there are various quantiles on the screen, and they are describing mathematical content. So for example, if you're looking at 620Q, that says that students should be able to translate between models or verbal phrases and numerical expressions. Okay, so as we look at students being able to do that, they would be at a quantile level or quantile measure of 620Q if they could do that. Okay, now what does EM to 60Q mean? EM is an emerging mathematician. So think about this as a thermometer. If you're at 0Q, that and below is your emerging mathematician. So those are students that are really below kind of that kindergarten level. They're emerging as mathematicians. They're not quite ready to be on the quantile scale. So they're just a little bit below that 0Q. All right. So we're going to learn what all these numbers mean, but I just wanted to just quickly show you what a quantile scale looks like. All right, so what does the quantile framework for mathematics do and why do we care about it? So a lot of assessments around the country, as including our own iLearn scores, are reporting quantiles. So this allows us to have a new measure for our iLearn scores. And so normed reference assessments also have quantile scores. Your formative assessments, your math inventory, which we're going to be looking at a report that you get from your math inventory a little bit later. And then also various textbooks are also aligned to the quantile framework. So all of these pieces are state level and national level pieces. And here's what we would be comparing it to. So if a student was given a grade level equivalence, we know that from school to school, district to district, state to state, that grade level equivalence could mean different things in different areas of the country or in different parts of the state. If I said that a student was at a grade level equivalent of 2.3 versus 2.8, that gets down to the nitty gritty. I'm year two or grade two, but I'm 2 months in, or am I 5 months in, or am I 8 months into the school year? And so then you think about the scope and sequence that a teacher follows might be different than the scope and sequence that a different teacher follows. So it can get very messy. It can be very gray in terms of really where a student is performing. So what Quantile does is it allows us to have one measure. So there's one yardstick, if you will, that nationally we can look to see where students are performing. So the fact that iLearn reports now these quantile scores allows us to not only compare our students to students around the country and around the state, but more importantly, allows us to really get a sense of where a student is performing that's not related just to grade level. It's not arbitrary, it's not subjective. And that's really what helps us to use the data to inform instruction. So I mentioned the yardstick. That's what a quantile framework is. It's a way to measure. So what exactly is it measuring? One, it's measuring students' mathematical knowledge. It tells you how far up the scale, so think about that colorful scale that I showed you, how far up the scale the student has reached in their mathematical knowledge. But it also tells you something else. It also tells you the difficulty and the complexity of the math skills and concepts that the student is able to do. So I think what's really cool about this is that it tells you two pieces: that what the student can do, what the student's mathematical knowledge is, but it also matches it with tasks. It matches it with skills and activities that a student should be able to do. And that's what we're going to look at today. You're going to have a number for a student. Okay, that tells me some information, but how does that help me? We're going to match it to a skill, a task, an activity so that the student is actually working on the quantile level or measure that matches their knowledge. Or if we want to challenge a student, a little bit higher than that. Or if we want to provide some prerequisite skills, a little bit lower than that. So we can really pinpoint and target the skills and the concepts and the activities and the tasks that we ask students to do. That's powerful. In terms of differentiation and accelerating learning and filling in some of those learning gaps, that's really, really powerful. So let's dig in and look to see how we do that. Again, let's go back to this scale. So think again about that thermometer. So we've got that 0Q. Below that are those emerging mathematicians. So those students really at probably that kindergarten or even below level. You may have some students who are in a kindergarten classroom in that emerging mathematician level. And that's perfectly fine. We have activities and skills and tasks that are aligned to that level as well. But again, just like a thermometer, we're going to move up as the skills and concepts move up. So we always have the Q after it. If it is below that 0Q, it has an EM in front of it to indicate that it's that below that 0Q level. Anything above that, we're going to have just the number and the Q. So the higher we get, and the highest it goes on the scale is 1600 Q. So if you're having a student at that 1000 Q, that 13,000 Q, that 16,000 Q, you have a student getting into that pre-calculus level at a 16 or a 1500 Q. So it gives you an idea of what course at the high school level, and it does give you a little bit of a range for a grade level. Again, there is not a one-to-one correlation between quantile measure and grade level equivalent. And we're going to look at what that overarching range might be, but there's not a one-to-one correlation. So it's not going to say, hey, if a student is at 700 Q, then they are absolutely at the sixth grade. That's not how it works. So keep in mind that you've got grade level equivalent over here, which is a data point, can be subjective, can be fuzzy and kind of gray, or we've got our quantile measure, which can be much more objective, can be a national measure, can be aligned with skills and activities and tasks. All right. So now there's two kinds of those quantile measures. So the first is the student quantile measure. All right. So this is where the students is we're giving information that says this is what the student is ready to learn. So these are the skills and the concepts in mathematics that the student is ready to learn. Wouldn't that be fantastic if when I was teaching, had known going into class in the beginning of the year, known what my students were ready to learn? That would have been amazing. Instead of just a grade level equivalent on some things and not other. And so having this quantile measure of all of your students before you go into class and meet your students really is going to be a powerful, powerful tool. It also tells you the level of success that you can expect from that student on an upcoming concept or skill. So if you have a skill coming up, you're going to be able to look at the quantile measure of that skill or concept, match it to the level of skill of the student, and see, is the student going to match that level? Is the student going to be below that level? So I need to provide some scaffolding, some support, some intervention perhaps. Or is the student above that level and I need to provide some enrichment? And then it will also demonstrate for you as you measure over time that quantile measure, particularly with your math inventory, you will be able to see growth. You'll be able to measure with a single scale, that thermometer like quantile measure scale, that framework, where the student is growing. Is their quantile measure growing over the school year in the areas you need it to grow in? Then the second measure is the QSC, or Quantiles, Skills, and Concepts. Quantile Skills and Concepts, QSC. This tells you all about the task difficulty. So this is telling you the cognitive demand, the difficulty, the complexity, whatever you want to call it, of the activity or the task relative to the skills and concepts. So here's your math that you're learning. Let's say long division in 4th grade. I have a quantile number that is associated with that skill and concept of long division. I also have a set of skills and concept and activities and tasks that I can pull from that are aligned to that exact same quantile. The two together support the student who's learning about long division. So we have a website that we're going to go to today several times that is going to show us where are those activities that I can pull from that are aligned to that quantile measure for long division. And then again, it gets better. And then again, what if I have a student who's below that quantile of long division? I have some activities below that quantile number. What if I have students above that level of quantile? I have activities that are a quantile measure above that for enrichment. It's true. It exists. This website exists. It's phenomenal. All right. So again, just to reiterate, we've got a student who has a quantile measure of 840Q. So the student is ready for skills and concepts at that quantile level, 840Q. So I'm going to match that with a task that's 840Q. So this is what that student would be able to do. So we're always matching. We're always aligning. And again, we have this website that can do that for us. Okay, so what is this magical website? Here it is. So we're going to do a quick activity and kind of an exploration. So I'm going to actually go to the website, and Brian is going to help you to find this website. And actually, if you go to the notes down at the bottom, there's a series of notes that ask some questions, describe the activity, but also gives you a link to the website. So we're going to go to Hublexilecom, and this is what it looks like. All right, now, the Lexile.com, Hublexilecom, actually has Lexile tools as well, which if you're an elementary teacher, you know that this is associated with reading. If you're a secondary teacher, then you may not have known about Lexile if you don't teach language arts or reading. However, if you scroll down, you'll see the tools for quantile tools. All right, so what we're going to do is we are going to, and you're going to have time to look at all of these different resources and take a look at what's available. We're not going to have time today to look at all of these resources. What we're going to do is we're going to click on the Math Skills Database. Okay? Math Skills Database. So go ahead and click on that. And you're going to end up selecting your standards, your grade, and your goals. Now, if you've been to this website before, then you're ready to go, okay? If not, then you're going to have to register. So I'm logged in, so I'm inside my account. If you're not logged in, you're going to see in the upper right-hand corner where it says register. So you're going to have to type in just some information about yourself, your name, your email, your school, just some quick information. This is an IDOE sponsored link. So it's totally safe. You're just entering your information. It has no student data attached to it. So go ahead and you're going to need to do that. But before you do that, hold on. I know you're all wanting to jump in. So before you do that, let me show you what you're going to be doing on the website during this activity. And then we're going to pause the video. You're going to do the activity, and then we're going to come back together. All right. So you're going to go in when you're on this page, you're going to go in and you're going to select Indiana. Certainly feel free to look at other states' standards if you'd like to. Then you're going to select whatever grade you would like to look at. So I'm going to choose 5th grade. And you can leave the all goals selected. In fact, that's what I'd like you to do, is leave the all goals selected tab. Now you can click and choose a particular standard for 5th grade, but we're just going to use all goals selected. And then I'm going to search. Now, lots of information here. Okay, lots of information. And so, as I mentioned, we're going to do some discovery. So, I am going to talk you through what all is here, but just based on the information that I've given you in terms of what is a QSC, quantile skills and concepts, the little bit I've given you about what a quantile score or measure is, and knowing what you know about the state standards, I'm going to have you do some discovering, some playing around. So Brian has some questions that he is going to ask you. You guys are going to do some, again, just kind of perusing, looking around. So I'd like you to pause the video. You and Brian are going to have some discussions. He's got some questions again. Take about 10 minutes to take a look at the video. And once you're done with your discussion, you can come on back and we will continue the conversation. All right, let's keep moving. So when we look at the kind of unpacking a standard, what you might have seen if you were clicking around, and it depends on how much clicking you did, but what you might have seen is that there may be several QSCs per standard. Here's an example of a 4th grade standard on measurement that is looking at 4 different QSCs for that one standard. So think about how many skills are necessary or how many concepts might be embedded in one math standard. We've all read the math standards. And sometimes there's just one skill or concept embedded in the math standard, right? Sometimes there's multiple skills and standards embedded. Sometimes there's so many, you're like, I can't keep track of all that's here. This particular one is talking about the 4 operations to solve real-world problems involving distances, intervals of time, volume, mass, and money. Okay, that's a lot. So what they've done is they've divided that one standard into 4 QSCs. That's what the website does. So you might have seen several QSCs aligned to one particular standard on the website. And so just be alerted that it is not a one-to-one relationship, because sometimes, and these are few and far between, but occasionally you'll find a standard that just has one QSC, but that's not certainly the norm. So what about the quantile scale in terms of that kindergarten, that EM, emerging mathematician, to that 1600 Q or that pre-calculus? What defines all of that? It really describes mathematics achievement across the content strands. So when we're looking at standards, it is that vertical articulation, and I'm moving horizontally, but it's that vertical articulation from K to 12 or K to pre-calculus that describes what's happening in the progression and achievement that a student makes as they progress through those courses, through the standards. So think about it that way. It's progression through the standards. But it's also about the developmental measure or the complexity that a student has. So the higher the number, the more complex the student is thinking, the more the student is able to achieve a level of cognitive demand. So it's movement through the standards. So think about that. but it's also movement from the perspective of cognitive demand and movement through the perspective of complexity. Okay. So when we're thinking about mapping math or what that quantile scale or score or measure means, those are the two pieces that are involved. So when we think about one problem, it could include several different strands or several different pieces of the content. So this particular task has geometry, it has measurement, they have to solve an equation, and so it ends up having some algebra, and there's some calculations involved, so there's numerical operations. This is a high school geometry task. And so there are some lower level skills. If we think back to that continuum of the math standards, the numeric operations are lower level, are a lower quartile. The algebra is a lower quartile than the geometry. The geometry is a higher quartile. Think about, I'm going to go back for a moment, think about that continuum. So the geometry would be farther over towards the 1600, and the algebra would be closer to the EM, and then the calculation would be closer to the EM. So you can see that one task can show multiple different strands or multiple different places on the quantile measure. Think again about matching a student to a resource. That's what we're going to do next. So we have a student who is perhaps at 700Q. You can see where that falls on the scale. And then we're going to match that to a resource. So we might have a resource that's at 710Q. And we're going to compare and order fractions using common numerators or denominators. And how would we know those resources are at 710Q? Because of the website. So the hub allows us to capture those resources, know what each standard's quantile measure is, each QSC's quantile measure is, and make that alignment. So we're matching the student to the resource through their quantile measure. All right, so our next piece is we're going to do a couple of things. I'm going to show you some skills on how we can use the Quantile Mathematics Framework, which is the hub, in order to do these couple of things. So first, looking at the complexity level of each grade level standard, and you probably already saw that to some extent as you were just doing the last activity. How we would differentiate within a lesson using the hub, how we would do some small group differentiation by quantile. So we're going to talk about grouping students by their quantile score and then providing differentiation by those quantile groups. And then we'll talk about individualized instruction and then using the resources based on that quantile. So really customizing instruction and individualizing it based on a student's quantile measure. So let's dig in. All right, so we're going to go back to the website and we're going to take a look at what are some of the ways in which we can use this. So if we are in the website, we can, let me go ahead and dig into the website or go ahead and look at it. So we were here, right? And I had pulled up all of the different activities. And I'm going to, with fifth grade, I'm just going to look at a particular standard. I'm going to pull up 5C3. Okay, just pick one. And I'm going to search for 5.3C. Now, I have how many QSCs for this particular standard? I have one. So I am going to first look at the quantile measure of this standard. So as I look at the quantile measure, I can see that this standard has a quantile measure of 750Q. Okay. So that means that if I think about this and I'm looking down the list of all the students in my classroom, I want to be looking and honing in on, if my lesson is about 5C3, then I want to be honing in on which of my students are close to 750Q, around that, and which ones are below, which ones are above. Now, we want to be thinking about within 100 points of the quantile measure. So we think about it from 50 below and 50 above. That's where your teaching range needs to be for students. Again, 100 range, 50 below, 50 above. So I want to be teaching and using activities and tasks for 5C3 at 700 to 800. That's the range that I want to be. If I have a student who's above 800, I need enrichment activities. If I have a student who is below 700, I need supports. All right. So that's how we want to think about it. So I'm using the website to look to see what is the quantile measure of the standard that I'm going to be teaching. All right. So that's my first look. Now, that's the complexity of the standard. Okay, so we have these knowledge clusters. So next, we're going to be digging in to the QSC. There's 3 different parts, if you will, in the knowledge cluster that we're going to look at. There's prerequisite skills, supporting skills, and impending skills. So prerequisite skills are just what you think they are. It's the skills that the student needs to know in order to get to the skill that is the focus skill for that lesson. So let's say again that 5C3 is my lesson for that day. There are going to be skills that will be identified in the hub that will be a quantile measure lower than 750, that are prerequisite skills that I can identify and tap into some activities and tasks around that. There are also going to be some supporting skills that are related to the math concept, to 5.3c. And that's, again, my focus skill. And they're not dependent on the student knowing those skills, my focus skill. So they're not dependent, but they are going to support the student learning that focus skill. And then the impending skills are skills that are the focus skill is required for the student to understand. So this comes after. So the impending skills come after the focus skill. So this would be something that you could do for enrichment. Right. So as we think about this, let's go ahead and look at another standard. So this time I'm going to look at 5NS3. So again, hold on before you start digging in. Just look at my demonstration. So 5NS3. And I'm going to search. Okay, now let's say that 5NS3 is my location, my standard that I'm going to be teaching that day. And I am going to be looking and see that I have 2 quantile measures for NS3. So I've got a quantile measure of 620Q and I have a quantile measure of 470Q. Now what do I do? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to make a decision based on your students' quantile scores. So you don't even have to do a pre-assessment to determine where your students are. You know where they are based on their quantile score. So you look down the list from either iLearn or your math inventory, or better yet, both. You look at their quantile score and you ask yourself, do I have students that are closer to 650 or do I have students that are closer to 470? And remember that 100, 50, 50 on both sides range. So that will determine where you're going to start. So let's say that the majority of your students are closer to 470. So that's where you're going to start teaching NS3, is that second QSC. So let's click on that. And that's where I'm going to start teaching. And so you can see when you click on that, you end up with the knowledge cluster. So I've got prerequisite skills, I've got supporting skills, and I've got impending skills. Now, this is where I'm going to then be looking at the resources. Now, you could easily miss this if you're not careful. You have to expand this to show the actual resources. So the hub is connected to tons, very mathematical term, tons of resources that are out there. They could be textbook resources, it could be digital resources, all kinds of free resources that are available to teachers that you can tap into that will allow you to quickly go right to that resource and use it with your students. So these resources then are aligned with this knowledge cluster. So if I look here, I can see that the prerequisite skills are at a quantile measure of 460Q, 330Q. Remember, what was my quantile measure of the standard? Remember that lower level was 470Q. So my prerequisite skills, of course, are going to be below that. So if I am going to be teaching whole group, then I only have a choice as a whole group to sort of teach to the middle. So I would go with my supporting skills and my resources here. Or I could go with the resources in my textbook because those would be aligned to that quantile measure. Now, better yet, I want to do some small group instruction or small group support. So I'm going to match the students in small groups based on quantile measure. So I put students into small groups. I always recommend groups of 3. If you have to go to groups of 4, that's fine, but students get lost in groups of 4. Now, that's not true if you're going to do small group instruction. So if you're doing small group instruction where students are rotating around the room, like in an elementary classroom, or even in, often we do this in a middle school classroom, but absolutely, high school teachers, try this. It is amazing. You work with small groups of students and you rotate them. Then your groups can be 5 or 6, no more than 6 for sure. So you're going to focus. So you have a group who has quantile measures that are maybe around 330, 350. You have, so it's clearly below that 150 on both side range. Then you have some groups maybe that are right at that range of 470Q. Then you have some groups that are above that 470Q. Maybe they're at the 550Q or 600Q. And so you're going to group the students around their quantile measures. You're going to pull the resources. So I'm going to click on supporting skills. You're going to pull the resources from that particular quantile grouping or measure. Now, what happens? I have more prerequisite skills and more impending skills. So now I'm at 350 and 90. So I'm going lower and lower. So you're going to keep going until you get to the quantile measure that you need. That's when you know you can stop. So if my lowest small group has quantile measures in the 200s, I'm going to keep clicking until I get a prerequisite skill that matches my quantile measure over here. And then if I want to move up, I'm going to keep clicking my impending skills until I reach a level where the students, so if I am back here where I was, I'm going to click on the highest value. So I'm at the 600. Now you can see that my impending skills are up to 850. So if I have students in that 800 range, then here are some skills that I can work on with those students. So it allows you to customize that small group work or individualize students' instruction in a way that we've not been able to do, at least easily, in the past. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. Now, I know this might seem a little overwhelming. I've gone through this very quickly, but you are going to take a block of time and really work with a partner, troubleshoot, problem solve, work together. Brian is here to help with any questions that you have, and you are going to work through what this would look like in your classroom. All right, so let's go back. Now, that is in terms of differentiating a lesson. So this just walks you through a scenario. If you were teaching 5D2 in an upcoming lesson, and Laura, your student, has a quantile measure of 450. Laura's small group has a quantile measure of 440 to 446. How can you use the quantile measure and the website, the hub, to support Laura individually and also support her small group? So let's walk through this. So I am teaching 5D2. And Laura has a measure of 450Q. So I'm going to go back to my website. I'm going to click on, I'm already in 5th grade, so I want 5D2. So I'm going to pull that up. This is DS, must have passed D. Let's see, or was it DS? Well, it would be nice if I remember, must have been DS. So DS2. Here we go. And I'm going to search. All right. Now, she has a quantile measure of 450Q. So which QSC am I going to click on? You're right. The first one. Because all the other quantile measures are above Laura's score. So she's not ready for those other QSCs. Keep in mind, they're all part of DS2. But she's not ready for that yet. So I have to click on the quantile measure, that's the 470Q, because Laura is ready for that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Now, there are prerequisite skills that are at 50Q. Laura is way above 50Q. I don't need prerequisite skills for her. There are supporting skills at 480 and 390Q. Well, 480, Laura can do, and Laura's group can do. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on that QSC. Now, I am going to go down to resources because that's where I want to pull in those activities and tasks that Laura and her small group can do. And so I would look at each of these individual resources. Here's an activity here, and I can flip back and forth and look at the different activities and decide what I want to do. The other thing I can do is I'm not stuck with just these activities. I can certainly look and see what the content is. Clearly, this is about bar graphs. And I may have some other resources that I've used year after year and I want to pull from. So here is where we again can customize for Laura and Laura's small group. All right, now what you're going to do is you each have an opportunity in your grade band, so K5, 6-8, or 9-12, to do a practice. So here is an elementary example. Here's a slide on a middle school example. and here is a high school example. So I'd like you to pause the video at this point. You're going to work through in groups, in small groups, these examples, and plan and discuss what you would do for each of these students and the students' small groups. So go ahead and pause the video and go ahead and do the activity. And I would say that this activity probably would take about 10, maybe 12 minutes, but take as much time as you need to work through the activity. All right. Hopefully you were able to discuss in your group these particular questions, and Brian was able to guide you through that. So let's move on. I wanted to show you a couple other slides, again, in terms of whole group instruction. So if I have a student, and differentiating even within whole group instruction. So if I have a student who has a quantile level of 670, I know, and my instruction is at 670, then that student is ready and on target for the lesson. And then I'm going to match the activity, match the lesson, and we're ready to go. Now, if before the lesson, I notice that the target, the student, is at below the quantile measure of the lesson, because the lesson is at 680Q, but the student's at 500Q, I could assign some prerequisite practice problems ahead of time, whether it's the day before or the week before, just looking ahead, that might allow the student to accelerate their learning. It's not going to automatically bring up their quantile score, but it is going to prepare them and make them more successful within the class period as you teach that lesson. So we don't have to be reactive all the time. We can be proactive. So we can be thinking ahead to, where are my students? Where are my lessons? And do I need to do some prerequisite activities ahead of time? Again, quantile measures save you from the pre-test, post-test. They save you from having to do all that. Not that you can't or that you shouldn't sometimes do that, but they save you a lot of time from having to do that because you're working off of the quantile measure. Then you may have a student who you know you're going to be teaching at 680Q. They're at 950Q. So they need an enrichment activity. Do they need to go and do the whole assignment that you're going to give the rest of the class? Probably not. I might give them one or two problems to do just to make sure that they understand what they're doing, but then I'm going to give them some enrichment work. I might put them in a small group and have them work on a separate problem-solving task or a project-based task that they might do. I'm going to give them something that is really going to challenge them. We want all students to be in disequilibrium. We want all students to be in that sweet spot where they feel uncomfortable, they feel challenged, where productive struggle happens. And these quantile measures allow us to do that. So when we think about designing lessons around quantiles, I want you to think about this activity. And if you have time, not sure how much time you have at this point based on the activities we've done so far, but what I'd like you to do if you have time, or if the session is over and you're ending your time, but this is something that you can do outside of the session, I'd strongly encourage you to do it sometime this summer just to practice with quantiles. Choose a standard that you're going to teach the first week of school. Plan a lesson around that standard, assuming that students in your class have a variety of quantile measures. And then talk about it with a colleague, with a group today, if you have time, about how you would access the resources in the website in order to level instruction for all of your students. How would you plan that lesson using the website, using the quantile measures in order to differentiate and to support all students? So if you have time today, go ahead and stop the video and discuss that as a group, discuss that, or go ahead and begin planning as a small group and engage in that activity. If not, I would encourage you to do that sometime over the summer. The math inventory reports, I wanted to just briefly touch on that because I've mentioned it several times, but we've not talked about what this gives you. The beauty of the math inventory reports is it gives you the QSC already. So all you have to do is look up the QSC. It certainly gives you the student's quantile measure. So that's fantastic. But then it breaks down not only by standard, but by QSC. So all you have to do is go to the QSC and it immediately tells you what activities you can do. So we went through by the standard and searched. So if all you had was the quantile measure, that's what you would do. But with the report that Math Inventory gives you, you're just looking at the QSC, searching the QSC in the website, and then immediately going to those resources for that student. So it is a fantastic way to have a comprehensive list of tasks, activities, and resources that are available and specifically matched for that student. So I'd strongly encourage you to use those math inventory reports. Some key takeaways. The quantile measure allows you to gauge the degree of challenge that you're giving to the student. It goes back to that sweet spot, to that disequilibrium we want kids to be in, that productive struggle that we want students to be in. You have the ability now with that quantile measure to match a student's challenge, productive struggle, with the material that you're giving them. So you can constantly keep a student in that productive struggle. You have access to free tools and resources on this hub that allow you to differentiate and provide resources that are just the right spot for students. It allows you to communicate with parents and communities because parents have access to this website. They're given access to this website through the iLearn reports that the parents get. So parents can access this and do any of these activities at home. And the DOE website walks parents through these activities and how to access them from the hub and align them to what their student needs. And then most importantly, it creates equitable instruction for all students because it is tailored and customized to the individual students. We're not doing equal math instruction. Equal means the same. Kids don't need the same instruction. They need equitable instruction. And so we have to meet their needs, meet them where they are. Do they need more? Do they need enrichment? Do they need to reach that higher level with enrichment activities? Do they need some support? Do they need some of those prerequisite skill work? Or are they right there where they need to be with the content you're teaching that day? Regardless of where they are, we want to provide that equitable access to the mathematics. So again, our learning intentions, we defined the meaning of quantiles. We looked at how we could build differentiated activities and lessons. And we talked about developing those appropriate, equitable math lessons. And I do hope that you'll practice that over the summer if you didn't get a chance today to practice that. Thank you again for allowing me to do this activity and this video with you. And I would encourage you to check out Keep Indiana Learning if you haven't already done so. There are so many free resources, and so many of the resources are from Indiana educators. We talk about Keep Indiana Learning being for Indiana educators by Indiana educators. So check out some of the resources that are available on Keep Indiana Learning. There are actually very famous Clark Pleasant staff members. Duke Lyons is one.